This episode of Pick Up the Six podcast is brought to you by the First There Foundation. We met First There through our friend, Eric Hohman. He's an Air Force combat controller, a hell of a guy. The mission of First There is to ensure all combat controllers have a teammate to reach out to when life becomes difficult. They know firsthand what it feels like to be forgotten, lost, or have lost a loved one. They'll provide mental, financial, career, and or substance abuse assistance for that combat controller. Check them out at firstthere.org. That's the number one for first, firstthere.org, and go support their worthy cause. Our guest today is a product of that partnership with First There. His name is Tim Brown, and he was one of the original Air Force combat controllers. Tim has traveled the globe chasing bad guys on behalf of Uncle Sam, including jumping into Panama in 1989. He has some incredible stories, so settle in for my conversation with Tim Brown. Tim, a good day, and man, I'm so excited to have you on the show today.
Well, thanks, Brian. I'm really glad that you invited me on here. It's a great opportunity to talk about a little bit of history that a lot of folks just aren't aware of.
I got a text message from our mutual friend and really huge friend of the show, Eric Hohman. Shout out to Eric and what he's doing through the First There Foundation. Guys, if you have not checked them out yet, and I know most of you have just by listening to our conversations, please do so. Go find their website. They're doing incredible work to remember fallen warriors and really support families, right, of specifically Air Force combat controllers. And just, man, grateful for Eric. He sent me this text. He said, and Tim, I'm probably going to embarrass you a little bit. He said, Brian, meet Tim Brown, one of the original slayers in CCT. He and the boys jumped into Panama 33 years ago. And so we're going to talk a lot about that. And we're going to get a bit of a history lesson, which I think is cool, to this special forces unit inside the Air Force. And Tim's got a little gray in the beard, right? Maybe
Just
a little long in the tooth, but
yeah, it used to be blonde.
yeah, it's awesome, man. So when I got a text like that, I'm like, shit hot. When can we, like, let's get this set up as soon as possible. Man, just thrilled to do it today.
Well, we certainly appreciate, Eric and the other guys reaching out to us because, as you get a little older, you get a little bit farther separated, and the global war on terror has taken a whole lot of attention, which is fine. They deserve every bit of it. Not to take anything away, but there was a lot of history that brought them up, just like special forces,
right?
And everybody else. And
well, I've talked to a lot of guys about this before, because we've had the very fortunate blessing of talking to a lot of guys in that global war on terror, right, time frame. And really that pivotal moment of that Tuesday morning, right, September the 11th, right, it's a pivotal moment in time where we kind of, right, to the right of that is all of this global war on terror. But, to the left of that are these incredible moments that lead towards our elite fighting force being what it is today. And our timeline is going to go through a few different things today. We're going to talk about sort of Operation Eagle Claw, right? A tough failure in our history.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about sort of Grenada, right? Well, that was like in the early 80s. And then another big moment in Panama in 1989. And what happens is you start building up these forces, and the Air Force, the Army, and the Navy start building up these elite forces. So you're going to give us a bit of a history lesson this morning, which I'm excited about. And it's going to lead us towards the 24th Special Tactical Squadron, where we hear about things like pararescue men. And we've talked to folks like Josh Apple on this show from Operation Red Wings, episode 124, or combat controllers like Eric, right? Like Mark Forrester, who was killed in combat. We had his brother Thad on, like Dan Skidmore, like Connor Matthews, those guys we've talked to, and how the Air Force guys have become part of this elite force, because you hear about Delta Force and DevGru, right? Those are the SEAL Team 6 guys, or who I like to talk to as the Bin Laden house party guys. But you were part of that sort of early wave of this special forces in the Air Force. I think like the 19th guy into it. So do you mind taking us back to 24 April 1980? Tough time, right? It was a tough moment.
Yeah, it really was. Lesson? Yeah, it really was. Number one, back in November when the Iranian students took our embassy hostage, it just shocked everybody. I guess there were some folks that said, well, we're not surprised, but we are shocked that it actually happened. But not to go back into the politics of the history, but that spurred our leadership in to do something. And when I say leadership, I'm talking about our military leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And they came up with numerous, potential mission combinations, and then finally settled on this. Charlie Beckwith was really the core of that proposition, if you will. Him and his fledgling Delta group, they had two squadrons at the time, A and B squadron, and so he was really pushing to utilize all of those folks. And of course, one thing grew to another, and it was post-Vietnam, so everybody had to have a piece of the pie. And it was really unfortunate. Although I wasn't involved directly in the lead up to Eagle Claw, all of us did something in support of it, whether we knew it or not.
Yeah.
There were so many classified little exercises going around, and they did things separate back then. They never really put it all together into a giant FTX. But you do a little airfield seizure with a couple of C-130s and a Ranger company. The Delta guys will go do a building clearing evolution, and they had models erected and things along that line. And then, of course, all the background covert operations there, people on the ground. Back then, we didn't have satellite communications in every backpack like we have today. We didn't have GPSs on every watch like we have today. We were in a time of transition, and we were still using older Vietnam era equipment and trying to break through the tactics, but unfortunately the equipment was still limiting us. But anyways, eventually the guys went out there. One of the interesting things from the combat control side was that up in the Pentagon, when they're planning all this, they go, we don't know how to identify this airfield out on the ground. All right. And one of the Air Force generals said, hey, give me one of those CCT guys. And, they knew that John Carney had been out there. He had been a football coach at the academy. So he had a pretty good network, and a lot of people knew him. So he was a good cheerleader for us, and a great leader of guys. Super good condition, always pushing people. But so they brought him in, and what they did is they came up with this plan to fly him in on a covert CIA aircraft, all right, at night, find the intended landing zones, and for him to go out there, take soil samples, and to implant remote control infrared lights to identify the landing strip. So
only the planes in the sky could see him.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct. And of course, all of this stuff is nation technology. It's really, is it going to work stuff? They didn't have any background. He did it. As he said, he flew with one of the very, very, very famous Air America CIA pilots. Those that know that will know. But he went in there with a little mini bike that they threw out of the side of the Twin Otter aircraft that they flew in on. And here's this 200-pound John Carney with his rucksack on this little tiny thing going up and down the dirt, this dirt strip in the desert. But he said it was a lot of fun. Scared the heck out of them all. Threw the little mini bike back in the Twin Otter, and they took off. 2 weeks later, there they are. They're flying back into that airstrip, and Carney's up in the front seat of the lead MC-130, hoping that this system will turn on. And it's batteries and switches, and making sure the switches are all in the right position, remote control. And lo and behold, the lights turn on, and it was like, oh, great, we found where we're supposed to go. Yeah. And again, not to rehash all the details on the ground, because again, I wasn't there, but we had the C-130s landed. They had a dust storm en route, but the helicopters had one or two of them had to turn back by the time they got there. But they had pretty much made the call to abort the mission at that point. They just didn't have enough helicopters and forces on the ground. While they were refueling the helicopters, one of them had a brownout, hit an MC-130, and the disaster that followed. But again, out of all of the disaster, the Phoenix rose.
Yeah.
And so many wonderful things came out of that. Number one, Delta was recognized as a powerful force. The Air Force, not only were the MC-130s validated because they were still kind of, they flew a little bit in Vietnam, but not much. And they still had different configurations in them, but they were kind of validated at that time. The fact that we needed a heavy lift helicopter with night capability was validated, and the Air Force got that mission, hence the MH-53 program. Our combat controllers were validated as necessary airmen to put that ground and air together and make all this work, both as a preparation of the battlefield, advanced force operation, as well as boots on the ground. So all of these forces were validated as requirements, and it started to move forward. In less than 2 years, they stood up the Joint Special Operations Command. Our first unit back then, it was called Det-1 MACOS, Military Airlift Combat Operations Staff. And everybody had names to divert it from what it really was.
Sure.
So our public chain of command was totally different from our real chain of command. And back then it was, let's go out and try something new. Okay. And you validated all the way up to the first E7 in the chain of command, and you went out and did it. And of course, Dick Marcinko was standing up as SEAL Team 6 at the time. So everybody was in a state of growth. It was a wonderful time to be an operator because the rules were very, very, very loose, to say the least.
You guys are kind of designing it, right? I mean, you think about, you're coming off this Vietnam era special warfighter, guys like Kirby Harrell, who we've had on this show, right? Incredible human. I mean, that guy, you want to talk about a badass, and the stuff those guys were asked to do in those kind of scenarios. I mean, it's crazy at this point, right? So it's sort of 1980 headed to 1983. The Grenada thing is kind of next on our timeline. But where are you in your journey, right? How old are you at this time? Where'd you come from? How did you get into this?
Well, real quick snapshot of Tim. I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. We were in the Lower East Side. During the '67 riots, it was, burning and havoc within a couple of blocks of my house. But I lived down, a lot of people go, oh, wow, what a beautiful place. I mean, we had Belgians and Germans, and we had, Southern blacks and Mexicans. Everybody lived there because they all worked in the car industry. They all took the bus to work, and they all, as kids, we ate every kind of food you could think of. And it was cool. We didn't look at anything as ethnically diverse. That's just Ralph, and that's just Migo, and things along that line. So it was cool to grow up there in that time. And then after the '67 riots, society changed a little bit. I went on, graduated high school, thought I was going to go to college. That didn't work out so well. And I ended up going, well, I'm going to join the Air Force. I'm going to go be an air traffic controller. I'm going to go be smart. I had never heard of Air Force Special Operations. I had never heard of combat control or pararescue or tactical air control, anything along that line. And so I went in to do my 4 years of air traffic control, come out and work for the FAA. And 28 years later, I finally made it out. I discovered the combat control thing while I was in, and it intrigued me. Went out there and went through back then we didn't have the selection system that we have today. Of course, none of the services had that at the time. You only had a couple of units that had a selection process, but as far as getting into special forces, getting into Rangers, you had to go through their schools, and that in itself was a selection process. So anyways, long story short, I ended up at McChord Air Force Base, spent a few years there, got a lot of training time with the 2nd Ranger Battalion. I got to know those guys really, really well. And as they were standing up Det-1 MACOS back at Hope Air Force Base, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, I was eventually invited to come join them. And what they did at the time is they'd invite you out on an exercise, and you'd spend about 2 weeks going through, a little mini selection, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
to see how you operated. And then if you did okay, they all of a sudden you had orders to go to Pope Air Force Base. Yeah, and your commander would be going, "What are you doing? I can't afford to lose you." We only had, I don't know, maybe 350, 375, somewhere in there, combat controllers in the world at that time.
Wow. At that time, yeah.
Yeah.
How many walking the earth today? Because the numbers are a lot smaller than Green Berets, Navy.
Oh yeah,
right?
we're
Bigger.
still a small force, but I want to say in the 700 plus range right now. I think the authorizations were up to 800 something for a while, but I think we've drawn back a little bit, since the end of the GWAT. And again, I'm a little separated from the active duty guys right now, but still interested in it, absolutely. But yeah, we were small. We were tiny, at the time. And again, we were spread all over the place. We had 12-man teams in places like Dyess Air Force Base and Philippines. We had two teams in the Philippines, a special operations team and a conventional team. We had a team in Germany. Then we had two teams in Germany, a special operations team and a conventional team. So it was all over the place. And the Det 1 MACOs, the JSOC forces, if you will, finally started to put all of this stuff together. And we became very good at interoperational work. Airfield seizures was kind of the Rangers' big thing, right? And then they were a security force for whatever target mission was out there. We were always on the airfield. We did a lot of reconnaissance stuff with the airfields, and we would also control traffic out helicopter landing zones. We didn't do a whole lot of close air support back then because they didn't bring in close air support at the time.
Right.
We had the little birds, the gunships, and the AC-130s. Of course, we worked with all of those as well.
That close air support are a lot of the stories that Eric's told us about, right? That Mark lived through, right? Those guys really, when they're conducting efforts, Iraq, Afghanistan, it seems like there was a lot of that happening then. There is that really, right, pivotal moment, 1989, right? We've got a real hostage rescue mission. When we were talking before, though, you said, we talked sort of about the lead up to that. But one of the things you told me is that, I got in, it got going, spent a lot of years chasing bad guys around the globe. Well, what is happening through the 80s before we get to that big move in Panama in 89?
Well, as a lot of people remember, there was a lot of small proxy wars, if you will, where, the Cubans and the Russians would support a small country that, and we would support another small country. And of course, drugs were rampant back then, and drugs fueled governments, which fueled terrorists in their own right. The Baader-Meinhof gang in Germany, we had, off the top of my head, I forget the name of the group, but we had the Achille Lauro cruise liner hostage situation in the Mediterranean. We had Beirut, hostages in Beirut numerous times. We had, you just go on and on and on. There was never a dull moment, it seems like. And I used to have a cool classified briefing, but I don't bring those things home. But it had all the timelines.
You don't keep them locked up in your garage in your Corvette?
I got them on my thumb drive. No, but
given the news of the week, some of you will be chuckling at that back and forth. Yeah.
But no, it was like every month there was something.
And every
it's
just busy, right? Just busy.
Yeah, and every holiday season there was another Operation Deny Christmas. We had folks down in Suriname. It wasn't the Jim Jones massacre, folks, but there were other guys down there, in Guyana and Suriname and places like that. So everywhere you went in the world, there was some kind of a bad guy threat, and the Delta and the SEALs and us and the whole JSOC intelligence community, as well as those guys, other guys in Virginia, that were all focused on this stuff. So it was an interesting time. Like I say, it was a good time when it came to the training because, we were still pretty open to any cool ideas. That's where tandem bundles came in. for example. Everybody does it now. Back then, it was cutting edge.
Explain that to me. Yeah.
This is where people are familiar with tandem parachuting, where
Sure.
a jump master takes and puts a person on in front, takes
Sure.
them for that first fun skydive and whatnot. Well, that was a great idea because, of course, from the military, we wanted to bring in people that weren't parachute qualified and didn't need to be free fall qualified.
But you still need them on the ground. And it's the best way to get them in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're talking, onesies and twosies, very specialized stuff. We're not talking about large forces, but that led to, we got a lot of heavy gear, and this is kind of dangerous taking this stuff, trying to put it on people. So let's see if we can consolidate it. And, we started out with these cruise boxes, rectangular metal boxes rigged up, and, guys are flying like this, and it was pretty dangerous, but we did it, and hurt a lot of people. And one thing led to another, and through the development time, somebody saw these concrete round tube forms that you see in construction sites. If you see concrete columns, they're poured into basically a cardboard tube, for lack of a better term.
Sure.
Okay. Well, take these tubes, cut them down to size, fill them up with stuff, okay, and rig them, and they fly a whole lot better than a rectangular metal box. And nowadays, it's become pretty common. All of the special operations units have got a tandem capability to bring in, oversized, heavy gear, things along that line, and not have to worry about a separate airdrop or air land or a helicopter insertion, things like that. But anyways, so it was fun. It was cutting edge. It was dangerous in its own right, but that's what we did. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Paratroopers always looking for some kind of trouble to get into.
You're always looking for some activity, right? Like, business is good, right? Like,
but anyway,
we're in the business of chasing bad guys.
Yeah, while we're doing all that stuff, we're still chasing bad guys around the world, trying to identify them. We're not having big gunfights. That wasn't the idea. The idea was to identify. In many cases, there were very quiet snatches, and brought to justice in our courts and prisons and things like that. And then, all of a sudden, we're facing 1988. Noriega's starting to get pretty ugly down in Panama. It's still big drug wars. He's cozying up with some folks that, we weren't really happy about that. So we started, of course, the diplomacy starts. Trying to tell him, hey, Manuel, we've been giving you a lot of money and help and support. We want you to come back and be good to us. And well, he didn't. So we started bringing forces down into Panama on a rotational basis. You don't hide a hangar full of guys with a couple of MC-130s, AC-130s, helicopters, little birds. You're out on the shooting ranges every day, things like that. 400 of your best male friends in a hangar is hard to hide. So it's kind of a show of force in its own way. We rotated in and out of there basically all of 1989. And then in the fall, Noriega became a little bit too intransigent, and the decision was made that we are going to go kick some butt, as well as the Kurt Muse. When they held him in the prison, fellow prison, he wouldn't release him. It was, a legal issue as well as a government issue, and it was a perfect opportunity to let our Army brothers go in there and kick butt and bring him home.
And they did just that.
And it was quite the operation. One of the lessons learned way back in Grenada was the communications, interoperability. Our special ops guys, we could all talk to each other, but we couldn't talk to the Navy. We couldn't talk to the Navy aircraft coming in. We couldn't talk to the conventional side of the world because we didn't have the same frequency sets. Right? And so we had a huge communication problem. And people think that it's easy to just pick up a radio and talk with somebody. Well, it is if you're on the same frequency, So, and again, back then we're talking, Vietnam era technology for the most part. We We were growing in the satellite communications, but we had more of it than anybody else in the world. So again, we talked to ourselves really well, and we had a real problem talking with folks outside of our circle of influence. So moving on to Panama, much better. I mean, the whole U.S. military could talk to each other at this point. And the folks, I give a lot of credit to the planners in a lot of ways, putting air, even space back then, air, space, ground, maritime, close air support, artillery, very surgical strike, tactical, ground forces all had inter-team radios. All of that, that's a lot of noise.
That's when we talk about moving heaven and earth, right? Yeah. Like all of those components. And it feels to me like you guys had to learn, right? Put all of those practices in place during that time frame. So when you get to June 28th, 2005, and Marcus Luttrell is the last remaining SEAL after 3 are killed in combat during Operation Red Wings, and Spanky Peterson talks to us about the gunship in the air and the Rangers in the village and the SEALs on the mountain and their Pavehawk going in to do their thing, right? That's a lot of activity, man.
Exactly.
Right? And all of that had to be kind of figured out, I guess, during your time frame.
It does. And this is where, spotting the combat control expertise, our guys didn't have of course, we all carried a little checklist book with us, but you memorized that stuff because you didn't have time to reference it. You knew AC 130 tactical frequency here, command and control frequency over here, airfield frequency over here, inter-team frequency 1, inter-team frequency 2, inter-team frequency 3. You had all of that in there, and you knew how to switch your radios. Most everybody carried 2 to 3 radios operating at any given time. Okay, nowadays you can do a lot of that with one radio, just switching channels. But back then we had to carry a URC 100 or 101 along with a KY57 secure device, along with a PRC 78 FM radio and a UHF radio. So you'd have 3 of these things going with handsets and headsets and combinations thereof.
Dude, you're fully rucked up. What are you at capacity, weight wise, with all that stuff?
You're depending on what you're doing. If you're just, going in on a hit and in out, you're anywhere from 80 to 120 pounds.
Wow.
And of course, we're not carrying heavy weapons. We're carrying a combat loadout. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
We're carrying an M4 with 120 rounds, a sidearm, maybe some grenades and 40 millimeter. Well, we're not carrying a range load or anything like that.
What was the likelihood during missions like that, maybe even specifically on that day, 20 December, what was the likelihood of a firefight versus what those guys were doing in close air support combat scenarios like they might have been in Afghanistan, Iraq? Is comparable at all? Or are they totally different?
Well, if you remember, for example, the airfield of Patia, where Noriega's private jet was, it was a small airfield in downtown Panama City. Quite a firefight there with the SEALs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we had a couple combat controllers involved in that. There was a whole lot of two-way shooting range going on that night. All right, they got very involved. We had some folks up in outside of the airfield. For the most part, on the airfield at Tacoma and Chorrillos, the main international airfield, the Rangers took care of most everything. A couple little skirmishes here and there on the initial jump in. Whereas the folks down at Noriega's compound, everybody was in a shooting game down there. So it depends on where you're at, in the circumstances. Back then, a gunfight was rare. It wasn't an everyday thing. Okay, nobody shied away from them, but it's just something that we just. It wasn't our forte at the time. Rangers were still Rangers. The Army's still the Army. The Navy's still the Navy. That's their game. We were very good at what we did. If we did have to pull the trigger, we didn't miss. We're very proud of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like Eric said, don't get killed and don't fuck up.
That's right. That's right.
And it was very important for us not to fuck up.
Sure.
Simple. you know, but, again, Grenada, Panama, lessons learned, and our command was really, really good about doing a super good lesson learned review, making changes, getting new equipment, making sure everybody was up on it. And again, I'm very proud of the fact that our combat controllers were so good at this, so good at this. And again, they didn't miss a beat. And if you don't mind, let me go back just a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
After Grenada, one of the big things that we had an after action report on was tactical medical care. We didn't have any, and we had none on the Air Force side. All right. And so John Carney, our godfather, had this great idea of said, hey, there's these pararescue guys out there, and the Air Force is going to put them all into the reserves because they just don't see another Vietnam need for them on the active duty side. He said, let's bring a handful on. So they did. And my good friend John Pagini was the first one. He was a very Silver Star decorated Vietnam PJ, senior NCO. He started to bring a few guys on. Lots of conflict. 2 Type A male-dominated forces.
Yeah.
Trying to integrate back then. It was ugly at times, but we worked through it. And Grenada was a great validator of that special tactics thing. Our pararescuemen at the time, we had developed an overland capability and an airdrop, the rescue all-terrain vehicle, and dropped a couple of those in. So we had that capability on the ground. They used it a lot on the airfields, transporting gunshot victims, things along that line. So it validated the use of the pararescuemen. They were out there flying recovery missions, and that's really where special tactics, as we know it today, coalesced. And I'm real proud to be a part of that time frame, because everybody nowadays it's combat controls, pararescuemen, tactical air control party. Our new special reconnaissance career field used to be the special operations weather teams. They've really transitioned into a unique force, but all those guys are together. It's kind of like an A team. You got the weapons sergeant, the intel sergeant, things along that line. You got all these guys that all work together to do a really good job, and that's what they're doing today in special tactics.
It's what for me has just been obviously. And I'm just so grateful, right, for the education on the timeline of all this, right? And because I like for us to go back in and we've told, again, so many stories sort of to the right of 9/11. I love to go back to the left and sort of revisit some of that. And been very fortunate to talk to, again, like guys like Kirby or even like Melvin Morris, Medal of Honor recipient in Vietnam. And you said something earlier about the technology. I mean, Melvin goes back into the battlefield to recover a fallen brother, one, because he needs to get his brother off the battlefield, and two, because he was carrying paper maps that had their locations all over it, that he had to go get that paper map. So the enemy couldn't physically obtain that. You think about just the way that all that paves the way for then when we get to those moments where like a guy like Josh Apple, who's graduating from med school, right, basically becoming a doctor, is in the Air Force Reserves, and they're like, we're pulling you up to go out. And he ends up playing a critical role in Operation Red Wings. He's the guy who has a red dot on Marcus's chest because he doesn't know if he's good or a bad guy in that moment. And they got to pull him in. And we talked to Spanky Peterson, who flew that PAFOC, episode 2 of the show, and sort of the crew that they put together. The FE on that PAFOC was in Vietnam. It's 2005, right? Vietnam was a long time ago. But I love it, right? And I love to hear you. And what I want our listeners to lean in on is all the elements it takes to make this stuff happen, and all the people it takes, and the way in which collaboration across the branches has to happen for success.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it was, frustrating, gratifying, rewarding, difficult, every descriptive term you can think of, was all part of that. The big word salad, it's like making sausage. Don't watch how it's made. Just enjoy it when it's done. and that's where we were living. But we were living it with real world operations, and skipping forward again just a little bit. We had the Haiti mission that was really not a mission. They diplomatically settled that, even though we did send forces in, and our combat control folks ran the airfield again. Before anybody was there, one helicopter full of guys came in and set up that airfield and ran it for a week, until they were relieved. But then we went into Somalia. Somalia had been brewing for a long time. The Battle of Mogadishu in October of '83, that was not a one night deal.
Right.
That had been going on for a couple of years. We had been deploying combat controllers out of Germany to work the airfields throughout Somalia for the humanitarian supply missions. They would land C-130s full of rice and flour and whatnot. They'd offload that stuff, give it to the non-government agencies, and then in many cases they just watch the warlords steal it. And they'd have to get on those. They'd have to get out and do it again the next couple of days and next week and everything else. But they were working in there for 2 years in civilian clothes on pretty high risk missions, because those warlords were fighting all the time. Right. They didn't just start.
Yeah. Jeff Strucker talked to us about that on EP 73.
Right.
And Jeff was part of, that Battle of Mogadishu.
Great ranger there. Great ranger.
Oh my gosh. I mean, you talk about an incredible human, right? And he was a big part of Black Hawk Down. Guys, go back if you haven't listened to episode 73, the way in which but he talks about how all of it builds up and then boom, it's a hornet's nest, right? And just bam, everything explodes. His ability, and I believe, and he talks about this, I believe he had a different level of protection. And he talks about walking in and out of that battlefield, legit, and his fellow warriors saying, I saw you walk in and I don't know how you came out. It's an incredible story.
And they say the same thing about Tim Wilkinson, the Air Force PJ that when the Air Force crossed there. As he said, he ran a little bit slower and the Somalis tried to lead him. So he makes a lot of fun out of it, but a lot of heroism there. And you're right. There's God loves paratroopers.
Amen to that.
Right. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. We've all been blessed, both in peacetime training as well as in with the bullets flying. And thankfully we haven't lost more of our special operators, although it's been tragic to see how many we have over the years. But again, back there, Somalia, they've been doing these hits for weeks. And I forget what number of hit it was, but it was not the first one, and again, I was in that position that I was back at home station as the operations NCO. So I'd go into the jock when they had a mission go down, and it was pretty much routine stuff. We'd listen to all the checks on the SATCOM, and everything was going, yep, got it, yep, got it, yep, got it, yep, got the precious cargo, yeah, recovered, took them out, blah, blah, blah. And it was kind of like yawn. High stress, don't get me wrong, but it was routine missions for these guys. They were so good at it that it was just routine. And then they decided to do a day mission. And everybody, even back at Fort Bragg, we were like, that just doesn't sound right.
Yeah, that cover of darkness is always a great ally for you.
Absolutely. And General Garrison was the commanding general JSOC at the time. He was a smart man. Absolutely smart dude, and how he allowed that to go. I'm not going to try to question or double think, the leadership at the time, but even back at Fort Bragg, we were like, really?
Yeah.
It must be an easy op. Okay, it must be something that's just okay, let's go grab this car and go home. Well, as we all know, it turned into an absolutely difficult situation. Lots of bullets flown, estimates of over 700 bad guys killed. And, we had our own disasters, but heroism that night, the first medals of honor since Vietnam, Stuart and Gordon, Air Force Cross, many Silver Stars, many that you don't even know about. from these guys because they just didn't get publicized.
Yeah, it was a different time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, thankful for the creators of Black Hawk Down and sort of telling that story so people got to see that and at least see parts of it. But you're right, it's a little different. A lot of Iraq and Afghanistan, and specifically Afghanistan, was kind of in front of us. And we were able to consume that in a different way, and the rise of those special forces. And I think one thing that's really neat, I wanted to talk to you before we go today, and I've always heard it when I've talked to Eric. I can hear it. I can feel it when I talk to Eric, or even my friend Dan Skidmore, same thing. Like, there is a real sense of pride in all the elite warfighters and everybody who puts the uniform on, right? Sense of pride for what you're asked to do. And we always say on this show, we're just so grateful for what you've been asked to do on behalf of our nation and what you continue to do. But the CCT guys, I just really enjoy it. Look, I mean, I grew up in an Air Force house. My dad flew fighter jets. So, right. I've loved to lean in on these conversations over the last year or so of this podcast.
Yeah.
And Eric just talks about just the sense of pride in that you guys are the smallest of those groups, right? You got a lot more Green Berets on the planet. You got a lot more SEALs. You guys like a fraction compared to that. And I know there's a pride point in that, right?
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. It is, many years ago, I used to go talk with the selection team down here at Lackland. I tell them, when we were starting this stuff in the early 80s, and we were integrating forces, the Army and the Navy grudgingly would work together on a mission. Grudgingly, trust
sure.
And we were always there as the air to ground coordinators. And again, they grudgingly let us into their tribe to play on that game, and then we'd go home. And eventually it turned into a good relationship, over a few years. And then what we did is we got assigned to those units on the alert cycle. So we would go over, and alert cycles changed over the years, but let's just call it an 8-week cycle. You'd be on alert with that unit, with that squadron or that team, okay, and you lived with them 24/7. Okay, you're either up in Virginia with the Navy, or you're right there at Fort Bragg with the Army. And you called in and talked to ops once a week, just say, hey, I'm alive. But the rest of the time you lived, eat, breathe, change underwear, everything else with that team. And your job was, whenever there's an aircraft, you talk with it, made it work. You did the HLZ survey. You coordinated the airstrikes, the air support, the AC-130, all of that stuff. And we became, grudgingly at first, but after a while, because the first week with these units, it was a selection for us. We had to meet their standard. And
there's one way to earn trust, right? Through action.
And if anybody says we didn't have selections, we had selections every freaking time that we went with the Army or the Navy. Because they had to see what we could do.
That's a great way to put it, Tim. Yeah.
So some of our guys were just beasts, and whenever they would come out, they swam faster than the Navy, they shot better than the Army. Those were suppressed. Hey, I don't want him back anymore. He's too good.
Not that there's any competition.
Oh, no.
Floating around there, is there? I tell you what, I got to last July, and you guys, we told this story and cool videos about it on our YouTube channel. I got to go be part of this smart reef deployment with my friends down South Carolina, Tom Mullican, SC7. And basically what they do is they're like, we're going to take a bunch of special operators and we're going to train them to scuba dive and to legit save the planet, right? So they've saved humans through wartime efforts. Now we're going to train these guys up to save the planet. It's a really cool concept, right? Because they have such a unique skill set. They work great as a team, right? And they're like, we could teach them to jump out of airplanes. Some of these guys already have underwater experience. Like, let's train them up. So you got guys that are like Green Berets and stuff who are now scuba certified. And part of that project, and it was through Force Blue and SC7, was to plant these smart reefs. I tell you all that to say, it was the chop was bad as we were going out to deliver these smart reefs, and we're taking all these boats out a couple miles off the coast.
Mm-hmm.
So it was about a, I don't know, 30-minute sort of ride to get out to where we're going, because we were going pretty slow. And I say this not to call anybody out, but there were a bunch of Navy guys and there were a few Army guys, and a couple of the Navy guys got sick in the chop. And my Green Beret Army buddy made sure they all knew he did not. Right. He let everybody know.
It doesn't matter whether you're 18 or 48, you know.
That's right.
It's the same, and it's all good. And what keeps our standards high.
That's exactly right. Before we go, Tim, you've mentioned a lot of names, right, of people that were critical, right, in your upbringing, guys that you respect, that you learn from. But what we do love to do is lean in here, right, and talk about warriors maybe we haven't heard of, or even those who have gone before us. So is there anybody else that you want to just make sure we know, right? Any other names we need to know?
Yeah. You know, during that transition time, you had guys like John Corn and Mike Lampy, Bud Gonzalez. Oh man, these guys in Vietnam, you know, they flew with the Ravens. Okay. You didn't hear about those guys because they were enlisted. Okay. You always hear about the pilots, but these guys were flying, calling in airstrikes from fixed wing prop aircraft, you know, and undercover. When I say undercover, you know, civilian clothes and whatnot, working out of embassies. They were doing special ops way back, you know. And then they get thrown back out into the post-Vietnam military, and they stayed. You know, God bless them. I mean, that was a tough time. And then they came in, and those were the guys that stood up our special operations forces because of their experiences in Vietnam. And the same thing with the other services. But man, we got a lot of great stories out there. And let me dig a little bit.
Yeah, please.
If anybody's really interested, this is a big, thick book.
Tell us the title of it so folks watching can see it, but folks listening on the podcast, what's it called?
It's U.S. Air Force Special Tactics Combat Control Team History. It's available on Amazon. Ain't cheap, but at the same time, it's not a novel. You don't just go in there and read a paragraph.
No, that thing's like 4 inches thick, man. It's no joke.
It is. But you know, we got a lot of history here, a lot of great names. You know, if you want to get somebody on that's you know relevant, that worked from Vietnam through. Oh, Mike Lampy, you know, senior enlisted advisor, U.S. SOCOM for General Downing. You know, and again, Vietnam, post-Vietnam, one of the early Brand X guys. You know, John Corn, Vietnam, early special operations, got a commission, became a squadron commander. You know, these guys have got leadership stories as well. You know, I was a young guy back then. You know, one of the best jobs in all the services, folks, E5, E6, trigger puller, get out there. You know, your job is to make things happen. Okay. Whether it's to break things, fix things, call in airstrikes, best time in the world. Okay. When you're too young, you know, you don't get to do everything. And as you get a little bit older, you get too much responsibility to do it all as well. But you know, again, I was very lucky in those years. I cherish every minute of it. But you know, again, the guys that I had as leaders, you know, the Lampys, the Corns, John Carney, the guy that was in on Desert One, super good guys. A lot of great history there. Good storytellers in a lot of cases. If you can get John Carney, the man can tell a story.
Yeah.
You know. Oh geez, Craig Brochie, Jeff Buckmelter, you know, he is still the deputy J3 for U.S. SOCOM as a civilian. Man, it must have been doing this for 45
must have been doing something right.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah. Awesome.
He's got stories.
Oh yeah.
You know, so there's some names there. You know, not counting the wonderful men that take the time to put these foundations together. Eric and his First There Foundation. Mike LaMonica's head of our Combat Control Foundation. They're not competing. I think they're parallel organizations that want to do good things for our forces, and they are doing good things for our forces. we've had a lot of guys injured over the years, and sometimes you just can't do enough for them. You need organizations like this to kind of help focus and find maybe that guy that was, didn't get noticed by one, he gets noticed by another. And so I look at them as not competing, but as parallel and supporting foundations, and they're out there. There's a lot of good foundations out there. And, the Special Operations Warrior Foundation kind of put it all together well before the global war on terror. They were taking care of folks from Eagle Claw, the guys that died and their families. Through every evolution that happened, and they're still out there, a very relevant organization today. So lots of good stuff out there.
Yeah.
I encourage people that have the time and the assets to go out there and take a look and support those where you can. And again, there's no lack of good ones. It's just we're a very, very, very small community, and we don't necessarily get the marquee in the movies. I know Dan Schilling's working very hard with the story of John Chapman, The Alone at Dawn. Hopefully we'll see that movie in the next couple of years. I know he's working very hard at it. That I'm sure will be a public affairs boost, but we're never going to have the Charlie Sheens and John Wayne and things like that have been around for a long time that brought a lot of notoriety. So small units, very good at what they do, and trust me, there's a lot of stuff out there that nobody's ever going to hear because it just happens.
Sure. It happens, and we need it to happen. And that's a big part of it. Tim, this has been an absolute blast, an honor to hear that. And I'm just grateful for you taking a few minutes and just sharing names, right? That's sort of the point. It's the reason why I asked that is for us to just lean in and just hear. Happy to do it.
My pleasure. And thank you so much for allowing us to come on and, speak a little bit about our
Always. It's been a great time. A history lesson from one of the guys who's been there through a lot of it, right? And part of really the Air Force standing up at special operations, which becomes part of just a bigger thing. It's part of something bigger than ourselves. And again, Tim, we're just grateful for you. Hope you have a great day. And man, you're welcome here anytime, my friend.
Cool.
He's Tim Brown. I'm Brian Jodis. That's been this episode of Pick Up the Six podcast.